Logan Ninefingers, infamous barbarian, has finally run out of luck. Caught in one feud too many, he's on the verge of becoming a dead barbarian, leaving nothing behind him but bad songs, dead friends, and a lot of happy enemies. Nobleman Captain Jezal Dan Luther, dashing officer and paragon of selfishness, has nothing more dangerous in mind than fleecing his friends at cards and dreaming of glory in the fencing circle. Inquisitor Glokta, cripple-turned-torturer, would like nothing better than to see Jezal come home in a box. But then Glokta hates everyone. Cutting treason out of the Union one confession at a time leaves little room for friendship. Enter the wizard Bayaz, a bald old man with a terrible temper and a pathetic assistant. He could be the first of the Magi. He could be a spectacular fraud. But whatever he is, he's about to make the lives of Logan, Jezal, and Glokta a lot more difficult. Murderous conspiracies rise to the surface. Old scores are ready to be settled. And the line between hero and villain is sharp enough to draw blood no matter who wields. The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, published in 2006 by Orbit Books in the United States, the first book of the First Law trilogy by Sir Joe Abercrombie. I don't believe he's a knight. He's not a knight. It is a grimdark fantasy series. You may be familiar with grimdark from the A Song and Ice and Fire series, also known as the Game of Thrones series from HBO. I have read those books. I may do a video about all of the books. I don't want to go through them individually. I feel like they've been kind of done a lot. They're very good books. Grimdark is a really good genre for people who are not familiar with it. It is basically that it's realistic fantasy. The real world doesn't have heroes, and it doesn't care how good you are. It only cares whether or not you survive. And that is a huge theme in this book, whether or not you survive. The people who write history are those who win in battles and in wars and in history. It's easy to compare this to A Song of Ice and Fire because it is that is a very popular grimdark series. I like this series quite a bit, or I like this first book of this series quite a bit because it wasn't nearly as verbose as those books are. There are a lot of descriptions and there are a lot of scenes that are structurally not needed. And I think Abercrombie does a really good job of only showing you the bits that are important. For example, there are multiple scenes of people coming to the same city. In a Game of Thrones book, I feel as though each one of those characters would be led through each one of their stories, through their entrance to the city and to where they are needed. But in this book, he only shows that one type of scene, the entrance into the city, into the port and all that sort of stuff, one time, and then it's assumed that that's what happens with other characters that happen. So it's a way of just getting more story into the book. And at 500 pages, I think that this is a very good length for a novel. In my Fall of Hyperion review, I was talking, it felt really long. That one's it's close to 700 pages, or at least it was the one that I read. Close to 700 pages, but this one really it cruises along. The Blade itself, wow, it really just from the get-go, it pulls you in and you're caring and it's action-packed and there's just so much visceral motion and brutality in every scene. Every scene is important in showing the, I don't want to say evil of the characters, but I want to say the realistic nature in a grimdark fantasy world is represented in all of the scenes. Little mercy is to be had in this world. Speaking of the world, this series has a really interesting, diverse world. It feels like each different
country or empire, I don't know how necessarily to describe them, is fleshed out and explained, but not in that you know the past three kings of each thing, or in that you know the entire royal family's names. It's very much grimdark, but he keeps the cast of characters small enough that you can kind of recognize when someone enters into another storyline. There's very little fluff. As I said, every scene is pretty well needed, I think. Brutality is the name of the game. This book is brutal. If you are triggered by very gory scenes and or tense interrogations, then do not read this book. But if you do love a dark, gritty tale about the end of an era and the rise of a I don't want to give anything away, but I want to say words really big and meaningful sounding. My dad is a dentist, and so the scenes describing acts involving teeth were quite illustrative, let's say, in the point that they were trying to make. He's really good at making you squirm while you're reading the book. It's brutal. I'm usually against that kind of stuff. I'm usually just not interested in consuming that type of media. But wow, it serves a purpose, and it kind of happens. I don't know. I don't want to give away too much. It's great. Definitely check it out if you're into that sort of thing. I do have to say one thing about word choice. Joe, we're on first name basis. Joe. He uses the word gormless a lot. I have a count of 4 gormless and or their subsidiaries and evolutions in this book, and I am going to keep track of that into the series because I love to keep track of things that don't matter. This is a pretty funny book. It's real brutal, lots of death, but man, there's some scenes where you kind of chuckle and you're like, all right, that's pretty good. He set that up pretty good. Where there's a lot of things where it's like a brutal moment and it's like very serious, and then there's like a twist of comedy at the end there, and the juxtaposition of it really is it just makes it so much funnier. And I was going to compare this. This is definitely more Game of Thrones in its brutality, but it has that little like sprinkling of lime zest of Discworld just in the top there, just kind of like just a little bit of snarky British commentary, especially in the inner monologues of characters. He did a great job in that respect. This series seems to have a soft magic system. I do not like to research too much into the world as I'm reading because I feel as though that can kind of give things away. And I love to be totally surprised by the things that I read. But I love that there's a huge community of information, a wiki out there for this series. And it seems extremely popular. I believe there are 10 books in the series now. No, it's 9 and a book of short stories. There's another trilogy, and then there's 3 standalones and a book of short stories if I understand correctly. If I don't understand correctly, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. This book doesn't have as many characters as other very large fantasy books, but what it lacks in quantity, it makes up for in sheer quality. Each character is so well crafted, and their motivations are very well thought through, and they seem to act like people would in those situations. Especially Inquisitor Glokta. I don't want to say too much. He's a great character. Evil, terrible, but a great character, especially, I mean, as far as I know in this first book. The protagonists are pretty bad people in this book. They are not great people, and it kind of shows you that in war and in a brutal society, the nice people are not who survive. It is the people who are able to survive. And each one of these characters is a different form of that. They're variations on a theme. Finally, I just want to say that Joe Abercrombie is a great author. I think he's wonderful at creating setups and then giving you payoffs right at the moment you forget about the setups. He's really good at that sort of thing. And he's also good at kind of weaving the information that's important later through a bunch of other information that's not nearly as important. So he'll do a big long list, and then in one of those is something important later on. I'm very, very interested in continuing reading this series. I very much enjoyed this book. And so we come to the time in the video where I rate the book. This book, The Blade itself, is going to get an 8 fingers out of 9. I really enjoyed it. There are some things I'm a pretty big believer in the idea that authors continue to get better and better as they write books. And this, I believe, is the debut novel of Joe Abercrombie. So just really, really interested to continue on with this series. And I hope you are as well. Little news factoid. In doing some research for this episode, I saw that one of the standalone books of the First Law series is in the works of having an adaptation. I believe it is Best Served Cold. I don't know anything about these books. Like I said, I try to not research too much about them. I think the only thing I saw was like the timeline of what year the stories take place in. But hey, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. I love doing these videos, and I would love your suggestions on anything you want to hear about the books and any books in general that you think I should read and review. But until next time, don't cut yourself.